The wind screamed across the high prairie like a spirit set loose from the bones of the earth, scattering dry snow over blood-darkened ground. Caleb Strayhorn rode straight into it, a shadow hunched in a storm of cold and guilt, the brim of his hat crusted with sleet. The gelding beneath him, gray and stubborn, picked its path through drifts with mechanical resolve. Caleb didn't pull the reins. He let the horse carry him where it would, so long as it was forward. Tucked in the inside pocket of his duster was a folded letter, creased from the clutch of a blood-stained hand. On it was ink and sin, a contract to kill a settler family. No names, just a mark on a crude map, circled in red, and the promise of silver at completion. The only words written, no survivors. He'd taken contracts before. Gun-for-hire work in the Dustwater territories didn't come with prayers or funerals. He'd shot deserters, bounty dodgers, and once a preacher who'd touched the wrong child. That one still kept him up some nights. But this job, it curdled his insides in a way nothing else had. Caleb wasn't young anymore. 45, maybe. He'd stopped counting when he buried his wife and daughter 12 winters ago, burned alive when their cabin was torched by men after him. Since then, he'd become something else. Not quite dead, but never fully alive. The kind of man folks crossed the street to avoid. The kind whose presence made children quiet and dogs growl. He reached Widow's Creek as dusk bled across the land. The wagon had been easy to track, new wheel cuts in frozen earth, deep enough to hold shadow. Smoke curled above the next ridge, thin and black, rising against the bruised sky. Caleb slowed his horse and unslung his rifle. He didn't like surprises. Not anymore. The scene stilled him. Wagon on its side. One wheel broken. The oxen were gone, either stolen or scattered. A man and a woman lay slumped beside it, throats slit clean. The snow around them had soaked red and refrozen into crusted pools. He dismounted and moved carefully, boots crunching the ice like shattered glass. The man's hands were rough and leathered, a laborer's. His rifle lay just out of reach, as if he'd been too slow. The woman's apron was stained, not just with blood, but with berry juice. She'd been preparing food, perhaps, when they were taken. Her eyes were still open. Caleb kneeled. This wasn't his kill. Whoever had done this had come early, too early, and they hadn't waited to make sure the job was complete. Sloppy. He stood, ears twitching at the wind. No birds. No howls. Only the brittle creak of the wagon's broken frame and the soft, almost unnoticeable sound of something shifting. Then a voice. Thin. Scared. Barely more than a breath. Junie Shu. He whipped around, rifle up, scanning. A storage box at the back of the wagon was askew, half covered by a burlap tarp. Caleb approached, careful, and nudged the tarp aside with the rifle's barrel. 2 girls. Twins. 10 years old, maybe less. Ash smeared on their faces. Straw in their hair. One clutched a tin spoon like it might save her. The other held the first, trembling. "You ain't them," said the bolder one. "You're too tall." Caleb said nothing for a long moment. Just stared. The bold one scowled at him. "You gonna kill us?" "No," Caleb said, hoarse. She looked at her sister, then back to him. "Promise." "I don't make promises," he muttered. They didn't speak after that, only watched as he moved slowly around the wreckage, rifle at the ready. He found no tracks other than the wagon's trail, and some boot prints that led off west, 5 riders, judging by the spacing. Professionals or close enough, but not careful ones. He built a fire just beyond the clearing, shielded by rocks and an overhang. He expected them to cry, to ask questions, to wail about their dead parents. But they didn't. The one called Junie clung to her sister. Lark, she'd whispered, and stared into the flames like someone 3 times her age. Lark asked him once what his name was. "Doesn't matter." "Gotta call you something," she said. "Call me Ghost." Lark made a face. "That's dumb. You look more like a bear." Caleb almost laughed. He gave them food from his saddlebag, jerky and a bruised apple. They ate slowly, eyes never leaving him. Later that night, after the fire had burned low and the girls were wrapped in the thick horse blanket he'd carried since his daughter's death, Lark whispered. "They said they'd come back. They said they'd finish what they started. Caleb watched the sky. The stars had gone behind cloud. A storm was coming. They won't, he said. How do you know? I'll be here. The bold one stared at him, then nodded once. That was enough. He didn't sleep that night. The wind kept him company. So did the ghosts. By morning, he'd buried the parents beneath a stand of cedar trees and left a marker made of stone and a single boot. The girls stood nearby, silent. No tears. You ever kill before? He asked Lark as they broke camp. She looked at him, unblinking. No. Good. Don't. They rode double on his horse, Junie in front, Lark behind him, holding the saddle tight. He kept the rifle across his knees and scanned every ridge, every shadow. He felt it building in his chest, a slow boil of something he hadn't felt in years. Not anger. Resolve. Back in Dustwater, the man who'd hired him, Baron Deke Kilburn, sat fat and drunk in his velvet chair. Caleb had never liked him. Soft hands. Greedy eyes. He remembered the man's final words before he signed the contract. Clean sweep, you understand me? That family's got papers that say they own the well rights under that patch of dirt. But those girls? They ain't worth a damn. He hadn't realized then there were girls. Maybe he hadn't asked. Or maybe he hadn't cared. Until now. 2 days passed. They reached an abandoned mining shack where Caleb once spent a winter hiding from Pinkertons. It smelled like bat dung and desperation. He patched the door with old planks and showed Lark how to start a fire with flint. She grinned. Junie drew horses in the soot on the wall. That night, as the snow fell again, Caleb stood at the doorway, rifle across his arms. You gonna find the man who did it? Junie asked behind him, her voice soft. Yes. You gonna kill them? Yes. Lark came up beside her sister. Why? Caleb thought about it. The answer should have been easy. Money, redemption, anger. But it wasn't any of those. I reckon it's the only thing I'm good for anymore. Silence. Then Lark asked, will you teach us to shoot? He turned, looked at her face. Still a child, but something older behind the eyes. No, he said. She frowned. Why not? Because I'm trying to keep some part of you from becoming like me. She didn't argue, just nodded once and walked back to the fire. The wind howled louder that night. The killer-turned-guardian watched it all unfold. 2 girls and 1 ghost of a man, holed up in a wooden box against a storm that had no intention of passing. The next morning, while gathering wood, Caleb spotted a glint on the horizon. A mirror signal, followed by the low sound of hooves. He cursed and ran back to the shack. They're coming, he growled. Who? Junie asked, eyes wide. The ones who didn't finish the job. He handed Lark a knife. Not to fight, but to cut the back wall if needed. Escape through the ravine behind the shack. Junie clung to her. What about you? Lark asked. I'll hold them. Why? Caleb paused. Looked at her. Something shifted behind his eyes. Not softness, he didn't have that anymore, but memory. Because you weren't meant to die out here like them. Lark blinked, and then nodded. Outside, 5 riders crested the hill, rifles raised. Faces wrapped in scarves. One whistled loud and long. Caleb stepped out into the open. He didn't aim yet. One of the riders called, Strayhorn. You're out of line. Step aside. Caleb raised his voice, calm and sharp. They're under my protection now. Laughter. That wasn't part of the deal. He spat. Deals changed. The riders didn't reply. Caleb lifted his rifle and sighted the one on the far left. He exhaled slow. And then the shooting started. The gunfight had ended before the smoke cleared. Caleb moved fast, his shots deliberate, unhurried. 3 fell before they understood he'd made his decision. The 4th tried to run. Caleb let him go, not out of mercy, but calculation. Word needed to spread. He wasn't finishing the job. He was undoing it. The 5th man bled out in the snow, gurgling Caleb's name as if it could be a curse or a prayer. Caleb watched him die, with eyes like old coals, burned out but still smoldering. Inside the shack, the girls didn't cry. Lark peeked out the back, just long enough to see a shadow fall, and not rise again. She turned, pulled Junie tighter to her side, and whispered, "We're still breathing." By nightfall, the storm returned, more bitter than the last. The roof groaned under wind. Caleb dragged two bodies away from the door and shoveled snow against the walls. He barely spoke, not because he didn't have words, but because too many crowded his throat. Lark sat beside the fire, her face streaked with ash. She chewed the last of the bruised apple he'd given them days ago, leaving the core untouched in her palm. Junie curled beside her, drowsy but watching him with one open eye. "You're not like they said," Lark said quietly. Caleb paused mid-stitch. One of the bullets had grazed his arm. He was sewing the tear shut with jerky twine and a bone needle. He asked without looking up. "The men. They said a ghost was coming to make us disappear. A killer with no soul. A monster." He tied the stitch. "You think they were wrong?" Lark studied him. "I think you were a ghost. Maybe not anymore." He didn't answer. The silence between them felt older than any grave. That night he dreamed of fire. Not the kind in a hearth, but the kind that eats everything you love. His daughter, Sarah, had blonde hair and a laugh that could light a room. In the dream, she stood outside their cabin, looking at him as flames rose behind her. But instead of crying, she just said, "You're late." He woke up soaked in sweat, the girls still asleep. He stepped out into the snow, rifle in hand, and watched the horizon for an hour, waiting for guilt to fade. It didn't. At dawn, they left the shack. The snow had turned powdery, easier to ride through. Lark clung to the saddle horn. Junie slept against Caleb's chest as they rode. He felt their warmth through his coat, and for the first time in years, the cold didn't reach his bones. They followed the river south, hugging the tree-line. Caleb didn't trust roads. Roads belonged to men with eyes and rifles. He remembered a woman named Beatrice who lived near Dog Skull Hollow. She'd once stitched him up after a bullet near the ribs and never asked questions. Beatrice opened her door slowly, shotgun half raised, hair in a braid streaked with gray. "Caleb Strayhorn," she said. "I thought you were either dead or drunk." "Both, maybe," he muttered. "Need a place for them. Just a couple days." Beatrice eyed the girls, then the bruises and dried blood on Caleb's coat. Her expression softened. "Twins." He shook his head. "Not mine. But mine now, I guess." She nodded once and let them in. The cabin was small but warm. Dried herbs hung from the rafters. The girls took to it quickly. Junie fell asleep beside the hearth without removing her coat. Lark explored every corner like a fox in a den, eventually finding Beatrice's sewing basket and beginning to repair a rip in her sister's scarf. Beatrice poured Caleb coffee and waited. "You gonna tell me what happened?" Caleb stared into the steam. "Kilburn family sent me to kill a settler family. Said they were squatting on claimed land." Beatrice frowned. "Baron Deke's people?" He nodded. "And I got there too late. Parents were already gone. But the girls were hiding, alive. And now you're what, their shepherd?" He looked toward the fire. "I reckon I owe someone." Beatrice leaned forward. "You sure this ain't about Sarah?" He didn't answer. The next morning, Caleb left them behind. He didn't tell the girls he was going, just tucked his knife into his boot, loaded the rifle, and walked into the cold. He didn't belong in safety, not yet. Not until the men who'd done this were below the dirt. He followed the trail of the fourth rider, the one who escaped. Tracks led toward a small settlement called Bender's Pass. Caleb arrived by dusk, coat frosted, eye sunken. The saloon was loud with laughter and cards. But Caleb's presence killed sound like a bullet through song. He walked in slow, every boot step like thunder. Faces turned. Hands twitched toward guns. One man, lean, with a broken nose and a coward's posture, backed toward the door. "You run," Caleb said, "and I shoot you in the back." The man froze. "I just rode lookout," he stammered. "Didn't even fire." Caleb grabbed him by the collar and slammed him onto a table. Cards scattered. A woman screamed. "Names," Caleb growled. "Who gave the order? Who killed the parents?" "Wade Kilburn," the man gasped. "Said the girls were too dangerous to leave. Said their pa had proof the well rights were theirs. Documents, signed and stamped. Wade wanted the land for the iron vein underneath." Caleb's jaw tensed. You saw them kill the mother? The man hesitated, then nodded. Did she beg? A beat. Yeah. Caleb's fist dropped like a hammer. The man slumped, out cold. Caleb threw a silver coin on the bar. For the mess. He left before they could breathe again. Back at Beatrice's, the girls waited on the porch. Lark was fletching a makeshift arrow with chicken feathers. Junie held a wooden spoon like a rifle. When she saw Caleb, she ran to him. He knelt, arms open, and caught her. She clung to his neck, and for a moment the world shrank down to one heart, one promise. Not this time. That night, Lark asked him, "Did you get the bad man?" "No. But I found out who he answers to." "Are we going after him?" "No. I am." Junie looked up from her bowl. "You'll come back, right?" He hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah, I will." Beatrice packed him a saddlebag with hard bread, jerky, and a single green apple. As she handed it over, she said, "You don't come back, I'll teach those girls to shoot." But it'd break them. Don't let it come to that. He mounted his horse and rode into the night. Dustwater Ridge sat atop a bluff, flanked by two canyons, and guarded by men with fast hands and slow minds. Caleb knew the layout. He'd once hunted a man in its saloon, killed him on the 3rd floor, then had a drink downstairs before leaving. He scouted the town from the western hill, noting guard rotations, weapon placements, and the best angles for approach. The Kilburn mansion loomed like a tumor of greed, 3 stories of arrogance and blood money. The moon rose full and quiet. Caleb waited. At dawn, he returned to Beatrice's, cold and resolute. "You're back early," she said. "Needed something." "What?" He held out the apple. "Tell Lark this was hers. She earned it." Beatrice smiled faintly. "And what will you do now?" "Burn the rot from the root." That night, Caleb sat on the porch beside the girls. They didn't talk much. Junie hummed a tune only she seemed to know. Lark chewed on a stalk of mint and stared at the stars. After a long silence, Lark asked, "What if you don't come back this time?" Caleb looked at her. "Then you take that apple, plant the seeds, build something that don't need guns or ghosts to keep it standing." She nodded. "I will." Junie leaned against him. "You promise." "I still don't make promises," he said. "But," Lark pressed, "but I reckon I'll try." As the fire cracked low, snow began to fall again, soft this time, like the land itself was trying to forget the blood it had soaked in. In the distance, beyond the bend, Dustwater Ridge shimmered under the moonlight. And Caleb Strayhorn, killer turned something else, prepared to end the job that had started with a contract, but now carried a name, Lark. And Junie, not just names, reasons. Snow burned underfoot as Caleb rode through the pass, wind howling through the narrow crags like the echo of something long dead. The land here was cruel. Sharp rocks, steep drops, ghost trails used by smugglers and men who didn't want to be followed. He preferred it that way. It matched what boiled under his ribs. Dustwater Ridge sat 4 miles ahead, blind to the cold justice riding toward it. He didn't carry much. Just his coat, his rifle, a skin of water, and a satchel with a green apple still inside, its skin now dulled. He wouldn't eat it, wouldn't let it rot either. It belonged to the girl who reminded him the world hadn't completely gone dark. That thought scared him more than bullets. He reached the outer valley by sundown. The guards hadn't changed. They still lounged in tall chairs, rifles resting lazy-like, assuming the world still feared the Kilburn name. But Caleb knew something they didn't. Fear had left him years ago. What stood in its place wasn't bravery. It was bone-deep resolve. He didn't care if he died. But he sure as hell would decide how. Instead of approaching directly, he circled wide, down a dry creek that twisted behind a collapsed mill. From there, he could see the backside of the Kilburn mansion, 3 stories tall, thick stone walls, guard towers made of timber. Lit windows and lanterns glowed inside like the belly of a beast waiting to be fed. He watched until night fully swallowed the valley. Then he moved. No words. No prayers, just quiet steps and a plan carved from rage. He slit the first guard's throat behind the tool shed. The second dropped with a snap of bone under Caleb's boot. The third he left tied in the stables, gagged, his eyes wide with the horror of understanding who had come back. A whisper chased behind Caleb's steps. Strayhorn. He ghosted up the back stairwell, slipping into a hall lined with oil paintings and dust-choked velvet curtains. The scent of cigars and spilled bourbon stained the air. Wade Kilburn sat in the drawing room, feet on the table, laughing with two cousins and a man Caleb recognized from a Bounty poster. He wasn't hiding. Why would he? Men like Wade believed they owned the world. They never looked for cracks in the walls. Caleb sighted his rifle through the parlor window. He could have ended it then, one clean shot. But this wasn't about clean. It was about clear. He waited until Wade stood, turned toward the hearth, and poured another drink. Then he fired, not at Wade, but at the glass decanter beside him. It exploded. Whiskey sprayed. Screams followed. Caleb kicked in the door. They reached for guns, too slow. Two dropped before they could fire. The Bounty man fumbled his revolver. Caleb shot him in the thigh, then in the chest. Wade backed against the wall, mouth slack. Caleb stepped inside, rifle smoking. The heat of firelight painted him like some resurrected demon. "I paid you," Wade said. "You were supposed to finish that job." "I did," Caleb replied. "Just took a different ending." "You kill me," Wade spat. "You make this bigger. The whole family'll come after you. I'm counting on it." He aimed. Wade threw a lamp. Glass and flame erupted. Caleb dove back as fire curled up the drapes. The mansion screamed with chaos. Wade fled through a side door. Caleb gave chase. They ran through halls thick with smoke, past terrified servants and guards scrambling toward the source. Gunshots cracked behind him. Caleb didn't stop. His focus was a razor's edge. Wade bolted into the ballroom, empty save for shadows and ghosts of parties long gone. He turned, fired wildly. A bullet grazed Caleb's coat. Another shattered a chandelier. Caleb rolled behind a table, then popped up and fired once. Wade dropped his gun. "Mercy," he cried. "You want money? Take it. I got deeds, land, gold." Caleb stepped closer. "You had a family killed over water. They were squatters. Dirt runners. Who cares? They had daughters." Wade paled. "They're alive," Caleb said, "and they remember your name." He raised his rifle again. But before he could pull the trigger, the ballroom doors burst open. 5 men in dusters and iron spurs flooded in, rifles raised. Caleb cursed and dove as bullets sang past. He rolled behind a column and reloaded, heart pounding. Too many. Too fast. He ran, slipped through a side hall, sprinted into the cold. Alarms sounded behind him, bells clanging, horses screaming. He ducked through alleyways between buildings, climbed over crates, vanished into the dark. By morning, posters would go up. Wanted. Strayhorn murderer. Dead or dead. Caleb didn't care. He made it back to Beatrice's cabin 2 nights later, face torn, coat burned, a bullet through the edge of his hat. She opened the door and pulled him inside like a mother yanking a child from the rain. The girls sat at the hearth. Lark stood quickly. Junie dropped her toy spoon. "You said you'd come back," Junie whispered. Caleb sat hard on the floor. "Almost didn't." Lark looked him over. "Did you get him?" "Not yet. But he knows." Caleb nodded. The next day passed in near silence. Caleb barely moved. Beatrice cleaned the wound along his ribs. He winced but didn't speak. The girls took turns sitting beside him, offering water or just company. He let them. When he could finally stand again, he found Lark outside, staring at the apple tree Beatrice had planted years before. It was bare now, twisted limbs against a gray sky. "You gonna leave again?" she asked. "Don't want to." "But you will." He didn't deny it. Lark kicked at the dirt. "I hate him. That man. Wade. I want to see him suffer." "You might." She looked at him, her eyes suddenly older. "If you die, what happens to us?" "You live," he said. "You grow. That's not enough. It has to be." Junie joined them, small hand sliding into his. "You said people can change." "They can." "Did you?" He looked up at the clouds. "I'm trying." Beatrice came out with tea. "Well, Until that change includes learning to make biscuits, you're staying put. For a week, he rested. He taught Lark how to read maps, showed Junie how to clean a rifle, though he never let her shoot. They built a fence around the coop, shared meals, slept without nightmares, for once. But quiet never stays long in the West. A rider came fast one morning, shouting before his horse even stopped. Dustwater Ridge had put a bounty on Caleb, $500 and forgiveness for any crimes of the collector. He's calling you out, the rider said. Wade's inviting every gun in the territory to drag you back in chains. Caleb stared at the apple in his hand, then at the girls, then at Beatrice. I can't run forever. Beatrice didn't argue. You're not meant to. That night, he gathered his things. Rifle, knife, hat. Before he left, Lark handed him the green apple. Don't let it go to waste. He nodded and slipped it into his coat. Junie hugged him so tight it nearly broke him. Come back or send word. Promise. He bent low. I don't make promises. But you keep them anyway, Lark said. He rode out under a full moon. Behind him, the wind carried the faint smell of wood smoke, and ahead, far down the trail, Coyote Ridge waited. That's where Wade had fled, not to Dustwater's heart, but to the old church high on the cliffs, surrounded by hired guns and holy men too scared to stop the devil in their midst. That's where it would end. Caleb rode steady, the rifle strapped to his back, the apple warm against his chest. The closer he got, the lighter he felt, not with peace, but with clarity. A man can bury a lot in his lifetime, guilt, names, even whole families. But there are things you can't bury. Not if you want to live. Dawn broke cold and colorless over Coyote Ridge. The cliffs jutted skyward like jagged bones, dusted white with snow, rising above the valley where the wind moaned like a widow too long left alone. From the ridgeline, the church stood quiet, its bell tower leaning slightly, cracked by time and thunder. Below it, scattered tents and horses revealed what waited inside, a fortress of fear ringed by gunmen, sharpened by gold. Caleb sat on his horse at the edge of the pine line, staring at the hilltop. He hadn't moved for half an hour. Snow gathered in the creases of his coat, and frost silvered the edge of his beard. But he wasn't cold. Not anymore. He thought of Junie and Lark, probably waking now, rubbing sleep from their eyes, wondering if today was the day they'd hear the news, one way or another. He thought of Beatrice, standing by the fire, pretending not to worry. And he thought of the apple still tucked in his coat. It hadn't browned. It was waiting like everything else. He clicked his tongue, and the horse moved. The trail narrowed as he climbed. No attempt at stealth. Let them see him. Let Wade feel it coming. Halfway up, a rifle cracked. The shot missed. He ducked low, then dismounted, slipping behind a boulder. Snow puffed around him. He counted 5 voices shouting. Then 4 more guns joined the echo. The bastards had posted men along the ridge, smart enough to know someone might try the front door. Caleb grinned. They didn't know who they were dealing with. He tossed a stone left, rolled right, and rose with the rifle. 2 shots. 2 men fell, one screaming. He dashed through pine, flanked them with a wide swing, caught the 3rd reloading. Close range. Quick. The 4th fired blind, missed. Caleb tackled him, fist breaking jaw, then quieted him with the butt of the rifle. He moved upward. The church loomed larger now. Its stained glass window had shattered long ago, but sunlight still caught in the broken colors like blood on ice. Smoke curled from its chimney. Warmth. Life. Cowards hiding behind old prayers. A sentry stepped into view on the porch, startled by the crunch of snow. Caleb didn't give him time. 1 shot to the leg, 1 to the chest. The man crumpled like paper. Voices rose inside the church. Boots scrambled. Wade was in there. Caleb knew it. He approached the doors slow. They opened before he touched them. Wade Kilburn stood framed in the doorway, wrapped in a fur-lined coat, hands bare, trembling just slightly. You made it, Wade said. You're insane. Caleb said nothing. Wade tried to smile. We could talk, you know. I got money. Men. Hell, I got land. You want land. I want an end. To what? Wade's voice cracked. To you. The first bullet came from Caleb's left. Someone on the balcony tried to be clever. He ducked and rolled, fired once without looking. A scream followed. Then chaos. Gunmen poured from the pews, rifles cracking. Caleb dove behind the altar. Wood splintered. Candles toppled. Holy silence shattered. He moved like water. Shot one through the ribs, another in the throat. A knife came flashing. He dodged, countered, turned it on the attacker, pushed deep. The man groaned, then fell, taking his sins with him. Wade ran. Again. Coward moved through the vestry, out the back, into the open snow. Caleb followed. Blood splashed down his sleeve, left leg dragging. He didn't care. His lungs burned, but his mind burned hotter. They met in the graveyard behind the church. Wade stood among the old markers, panting, his pistol raised, shaking. "You ain't making it out of here," he gasped. "Didn't come to," Caleb replied. "You kill me, they'll hunt you till the end of days. They've been doing that since I buried my daughter." Wade fired. Missed. Caleb didn't. The shot tore through Wade's shoulder. He dropped the pistol, screamed. Caleb approached. Wade stumbled back, fell against a headstone, blood painting the marble. "I didn't kill them myself," he rasped. "I just gave the word. Doesn't that matter?" "It matters," Caleb said. "That's why I'm here. You ain't the law. I'm what's left when law don't work." Wade trembled. They were nobodies. They were somebody to those girls. That's more than you ever were to anyone. He raised the rifle. Wade whimpered, "Please." Caleb hesitated. Snow fell in fat flakes, softening the world around them. Wade bled and shook, eyes wide with the fear of knowing his story was at its end. Caleb lowered the rifle. Wade blinked. Hope sparked. Then Caleb drew the knife from his belt. No bullet. No mercy. Just the slow, sharp kind of justice that made men remember, if they were still capable of remembering. When it was done, Caleb stood alone among the graves, breath fogging the air. He wiped the blade on the dead man's coat, then sheathed it. He didn't speak. There was nothing left to say. By the time he returned to the church, most of the men had fled or lay still. The structure smoked, bullet-pocked, and broken. He found a saddlebag in the vestry, filled with silver coins, ledgers, contracts. He took only one thing, the deed the girl's father had died to protect. Water rights. The well. Their future. He tucked it beside the apple. Then he set the church on fire. The blaze could be seen for miles, licking up into the clouds, turning snow to steam. People would come running. Let them see what the end of tyranny looked like. He rode hard through the night. It took a day and a half to return to the cabin. When he finally crested the hill, the smoke from Beatrice's chimney rose steady, peaceful. The girls were outside, huddled beneath a blanket, eyes fixed on the horizon. When they saw him, they didn't run. They waited. Let him come to them. He dismounted, bones aching, wounds raw. Junie stepped forward. "You came back." Lark followed, quieter. "Did he suffer?" Caleb looked her in the eye. "Yes." She nodded, then did something she hadn't done before. She hugged him, arms around his waist. No words. He froze. Then he let himself feel it. Later, by the fire, he pulled out the apple. Lark stared at it, then took it gently from his hand. "You didn't eat it," she said. "Wasn't mine to eat." She turned it over, inspecting it. "Still good. Plant the seeds come spring," Caleb said. "Some things should grow." Junie leaned against him, tired but safe. "Are we done running?" "I think so." Beatrice smiled from her chair, knitting quietly. The room glowed warm. Outside, the wind carried only snow. No thunder of hooves. No gunfire. Just the sound of peace settling in old bones. That night, Caleb sat awake while the girls slept. He stared at the fire until it was coals. Not because he feared the dark, but because for the first time in years he didn't. A man can bury his name, his past, and everything he's done. But what a man becomes, that stays above ground. He closed his eyes and let the silence hold him. The schoolhouse burned like a page torn from hell's own journal. The flames ate through timber and books alike, curling paper edges into ash and smoke that stung the night. In the distance, over the chorus of fire and crackling ruin, came the righteous howls of men convinced they were doing God's work. They shouted slurs and accusations, which whore, devil scribe, as if the words themselves were bullets. They'd waited until dusk, until her students had walked home, until the valley was quiet. It wasn't a warning. It was a verdict. Caroline Hale stood at the edge of the bluff, watching the inferno from half a mile out, her arms folded protectively around the curve of her belly. The fire glowed in her eyes, but her face didn't move. No tears, no trembling, just the clenched jaw of someone who had already mourned everything that could be taken from her. Behind her, a horse shifted anxiously, tied to a post outside the humble cabin she used to call both home and school. Not 5 days ago, the girls had sat in a circle beneath the cottonwood trees, their fingertips smudged with ink, copying the Bill of Rights onto rough-cut paper. That simple act, teaching girls to write, was why the fire burned. Caroline's hand tightened around a worn leather satchel slung over her shoulder. Inside were salvage books, Jane Eyre, Plato's Republic, a King James Bible with her late husband's name scrawled on the inside cover. That man had died trying to bring civility west, and now his widow, 7 months with child, was being hunted for continuing his mission. The wind turned. Smoke licked toward her. Caroline untied the horse, hoisted herself into the saddle, and didn't look back. She didn't have to. The flames would write their own eulogy. The land ahead was painted with moonlight and shadow. She pushed the horse into a trot, then a gallop, taking the narrow deer path that led away from the town of Ash Bluff. It wasn't safe anymore, not for her, not for the baby growing inside her. But safety wasn't her goal. Not yet. First, she needed to disappear. The hooves pounded like a heartbeat over dry grass and sandstone. Sagebrush tore at her skirt. Coyotes howled in the distance. Somewhere in her chest, fear clanged like a dinner bell. But she swallowed it down. The road wasn't long. What came after it was. Before dawn, she had to be out of range, out of their law. By the 3rd mile, her limbs were aching, her breath ragged. The jostling in the saddle twisted pain through her spine and belly, sharp and unforgiving. The baby kicked hard. Her palm went to her side, and she gasped through clenched teeth. "Not now," she whispered. She dismounted near a rocky overhang, where a narrow spring cut through limestone. There, she gave the horse water and caught her breath, kneeling beside a stone slick with dew. Her fingers trembled. The contractions weren't constant, but they were there, pulling like threads. She leaned against the rock, eyes closed, hearing her husband's voice in memory. "When they call you dangerous, you'll know you're doing something right." It had been their wedding day, spoken half joking, fully proud. She'd just received a letter from a Boston paper refusing to publish her article on frontier education for girls. "Too radical," they'd said. He'd kissed her temple and whispered, "Then let them call you radical." A snapping twig yanked her back to the present. Her eyes flew open. Another crack, closer. She reached for the revolver hidden in her satchel, loaded it quick, held her breath. Then a small voice whispered, "Miss Hale?" Out of the shadows came a slim girl in a tattered dress. It was Ellie Harrow, one of her pupils, no more than 14. The girl's eyes were wild, breath short, and she was barefoot. "Ellie." Caroline dropped to her knees, seized her shoulders. "What are you doing here?" "They said they're coming for you," Ellie panted. "The Reverend and the Crows. They said they're talking you in the morning, or talking her head." Caroline's throat locked up. Ellie glanced at the horse. "You running?" "I was." "Then take me." Caroline shook her head. "Ellie, your family." "My family threw a rock through your window," the girl snapped. "You taught me to read. You gave me pride and prejudice. My father gave me a bruise." There was no time to argue. Caroline helped Ellie mount the horse behind her, and they vanished into the shale hills. By daylight, they'd ridden 10 miles east. But the trail was dry and open, and Caroline knew they were leaving tracks. They needed shelter. Somewhere quiet. Somewhere few would dare to look. Somewhere that didn't answer to Ash Bluff or its twisted sense of justice. The sun climbed higher, and her vision blurred. Her body was revolting against the pace. Ellie rode behind her, silent but steady, her small hands clutched tight around Caroline's waist. By noon, they reached the edge of the plateau locals called Devil's Hollow. It was no place for decent folk. But Caroline wasn't considered decent anymore, and she had a child to protect. She dismounted, wobbling, and led the horse to a patch of shade. There was a half-collapsed shack nearby, and the canyon walls cradled them in shadow. Water ran somewhere below, echoing off stone. Then another sound. A cocking rifle. "Step real slow away from my dog," came a gravel-coated voice. Caroline froze. A tall man stood in the shadows of the shack. Wide shoulders, dust-stained shirt, and eyes like gunmetal. His rifle was aimed without tremble. "I ain't here to steal," Caroline said. "No," the man replied, "but you're running from someone. That usually makes people dangerous." Caroline stood straight despite her fatigue. "I'm a teacher, pregnant, and hunted." The man looked at Ellie, then back to Caroline. "Preacher Trask sent riders out this way." "We know," Ellie whispered. "I'm not here to cause you harm," Caroline added. "We'll move on." The man hesitated. Then he lowered the rifle. "You're not moving anywhere tonight," he said. "You look like hell. That baby's coming early, if I'm not mistaken." Caroline's pride warred with a pain in her lower back. She grimaced. "I can pay. Don't want your money. What do you want?" The man gave her a long, unreadable look. "Just don't die in my shack." With that, he turned and walked inside. Caroline followed, breath short. Inside the shack was little more than a cot, a table, a stove, and a few old war medals hanging from a rusted nail. The place stank of leather and tobacco, but it was dry, and the walls were thick. Ellie helped Caroline sit. The man brought water. His name, she learned, was James Cutter. Once a soldier, now a recluse. He didn't talk much, but his dog, a graying mutt named Jasper, curled up at her feet like they'd been friends forever. "Why'd you leave the army?" Ellie asked. "Because I got tired of talking orders from people dumber than me," he said flatly. "Same reason I don't go into town." "You believe in teaching girls?" He looked at Caroline. "I believe in keeping people alive." That night, Caroline awoke to the sound of wind howling through the canyon. A full moon lit the floorboards. She eased herself up, ignoring the throbbing in her back. Outside, James stood with a lantern, staring down the valley. He didn't turn when she stepped beside him. "They'll come, you know," she said. "I know. You don't owe me anything." "Maybe not," he said. "But I had a wife once. She taught kids too. Carried one of mine. Some men came through, called her a witch for teaching Comanche girls. I buried both of them in the same hole." Caroline said nothing for a long time. Finally she murmured, "Then why help me?" He turned. "Because it ain't about you. It's about what's right. And what's coming is wrong." Far down in the brush, a flicker of firelight glowed, just barely visible. "Found your trail," he said. Caroline's hand drifted to her belly. The baby kicked again. James narrowed his eyes. "They'll reach us by morning." And just like that, the fire wasn't behind her anymore. It was coming again. This time, she wouldn't run. The dawn broke in hues of bronze and lavender, washing the hollow in a muted glow that made every blade of sagebrush glisten with dew. But the beauty didn't fool Caroline Hale. Beneath the tranquil veil, she felt the weight of eyes. Watching. Waiting. She hadn't slept. Not really. Neither had James Cutter. He sat on the edge of the porch, cleaning a rifle that looked older than the war medals nailed beside the door. His movements were slow but deliberate, like a man who knew every tick of the coming day would matter. Jasper, the gray dog with sad eyes, lay beside him, head lifting at every gust of wind. Inside, Caroline was boiling water in a dented tin kettle, gripping the edge of the stove for balance. Ellie dozed in the corner, wrapped in a horse blanket, exhausted from the ride, the fear, and the reality that she was now a fugitive by association. Caroline's belly had tightened overnight. Not full contractions yet, but enough to remind her the clock inside her womb was ticking. She poured the hot water into a chipped basin, dipped a cloth, and pressed it to her neck. Every breath felt shorter, every muscle more unwilling. "I need to be moving," she said aloud, though mostly to herself. James didn't answer. She stepped outside, arms crossed over her belly, and caught him peering through a dented brass spyglass toward the western ridge. "Anything?" she asked. "They're still 3 miles off," he muttered. "Camped, most likely. But that means they'll come with sun high." Caroline studied him. He hadn't shaved in days. His shirt was stained. And yet, every gesture told her he'd been through this before. She hated that it made her feel safer. "We could leave," she said. "You could try." His voice wasn't cruel, just honest. The terrain was too open, the baby too close. They'd be caught in the saddle, or worse. "They'll want blood," she whispered. James didn't reply. He stood, stretched his back, and finally met her eyes. "Then let's make it cost, Em." A plan was born between them, not in loud declarations, but in small, shared tasks. James handed her a shovel. She didn't ask what it was for, just started digging where he pointed. A shallow trench along the edge of the hollow, where dry leaves would be gathered and soaked with lamp oil. A fire break, he called it. A trap. Ellie, once awake, was put to work too. She helped reinforce the back wall of the shack with sacks of grain and stacked firewood. She didn't ask why until James brought out the second rifle. "I don't know how to shoot," she said nervously. "You're gonna learn." Caroline hesitated. "She's a child." "No such thing out here," he said. "Not anymore." Ellie held the weapon with trembling hands. James showed her how to aim, how to keep her elbows tucked. The girl's fingers fumbled, but her eyes were steady. Caroline watched, heart twisting. Education used to mean poetry and arithmetic. Now it meant survival. By mid-morning, sweat coated their necks. Flies buzzed in the heat. James cut slits in the shack shutters for sight lines, then positioned the rifles. 2 long-barrel repeaters and his Colt Navy revolver at his hip. Caroline sat inside, knees drawn to her chest. She tried to read, but the words blurred. Her child kicked again, strong this time. Almost defiant. "You're stubborn," she murmured. "Just like your father." She looked up when James entered, wiping his hands on a rag. He studied her face a moment, then lowered himself beside her. "You scared?" "Yes," she said. "Good. Means you're thinking clear." She turned to him. "Why are you doing this? You don't even know me." He exhaled slowly. "When I lost my wife, there wasn't a soul who stood up for her. They let her die because she taught the wrong kids the wrong books in the wrong place. I ain't fixin' to let that happen again." Silence stretched between them, full of what couldn't be undone, and what still might. "Do you think I'm crazy?" she asked. "Teaching girls to read?" James chuckled. "I think you're a damn fool. But the kind of fool this world needs." Outside, Jasper barked once, short, sharp. James froze, reached for the spyglass. A thin line of riders moved along the ridge, 4, maybe 5. Guns visible, moving slow, confident. They'd be in the hollow by noon. "We're out of time," he muttered. Caroline forced herself to stand. Pain stabbed her side, but she pushed through it. No more waiting. No more hoping someone else would ride in and fix it. James set her up near the eastern window, gave her a loaded pistol and a jug of water. "If they get through, go out the back and keep running. I'll hold them as long as I can." "You sound like a man expecting to die," she said. He met her gaze. "I already did. Back then, when they took my family. Everything after's just been breathed." She wanted to argue, but the look in his eyes stopped her. He meant every word. And now she understood. He hadn't been living for years, just existing. Until now. The sound of hooves came by noon. Dust curled on the horizon. Ellie gripped her rifle tight. Caroline pressed her fingers to her belly, whispered something only the child could hear. The first of them emerged from the sagebrush, rider in black, bandana pulled up, rifle across his lap. Behind him came Reverend Trask, upright and grim, mouth curled like a viper in sermon. His voice carried. "Caroline Hale, come out now and face judgment. We are the hand of righteousness." James stepped from the shadows of the porch. "No one here by that name," he called calmly. Trask sneered. "We know she's in there, Cutter. You're harboring sin, and sin brings fire." James rested his rifle on his shoulder. "You light a fire here, Reverend. You best pray your God can put it out." Another man barked a laugh, leveled his weapon. "What are you, her savior?" James didn't flinch. No, just her shield. A tense silence followed. Then Trask raised his hand, and the first shot rang out. The bullet hit the porch beam beside James. He ducked, fired back. Chaos erupted. Ellie screamed, ducked behind the woodpile, and returned fire with shaking hands. Caroline knelt by the window, heart hammering, squeezing the trigger as she aimed for shadows. The sound of gunfire became a storm, echoing off stone. Bullets splintered wood. One grazed the window frame near Caroline's head. She didn't stop. Couldn't. James took one down with a clean shot. Another man's horse reared and bucked. Screams. Dust. Blood. Then something shifted. Smoke curled from the trench they dug. Caroline caught the scent, oil, and sagebrush, igniting. James had lit the trap. Flames rose like a wall between them and the riders. The Reverend shouted, trying to rally his men, but the fire was faster. It leapt from bush to bush, devouring everything in its wake. Caroline rushed to the doorway, watching as Trask stumbled from his horse, clothes catching ember. He slapped at them, cursing, scrambling away. The others followed, some limping, some half-blind with smoke. They retreated back toward the ridge, leaving the hollow behind. James collapsed against the porch rail, panting. A deep red streak bloomed on his shoulder. "You're hit," she said, dropping beside him. "Just grazed," he muttered. "Could have been worse." Caroline helped him inside. Ellie followed, ash streaked on her cheeks, eyes wide. "Did we win?" she asked. James grunted. "They'll be back." "But not today," Caroline said. She helped James to the cot, ripped cloth from an old shirt and pressed it to the wound. He grimaced but didn't cry out. "Reverend Trask won't forget this," he said. "He's the kind who rewrites a loss into a prophecy." "I'm not done either," she replied. James looked up at her. "Then you better build something worth defending." She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "I will, and I'll teach others to do the same." Ellie sat beside Jasper on the floor, cradling the rifle. "Will they ever stop coming?" she asked. Caroline looked out the window at the charred earth and drifting smoke. "Not on their own. But one day, maybe they'll be outnumbered." James gave a short laugh. "That's a war for another day." "No," Caroline said softly. "It's the same war. And I just joined it." She stood, placed her hand over her belly. And somewhere deep within her, the baby shifted again, quiet, strong. The smoke thinned. The wind changed. And a new fire had just begun to burn. The hollow smelled of scorched sage and blood. By morning, the embers had cooled, but the memory of the firefight clung to every shadow like soot. James Cutter's shirt was stiff with dried blood where Caroline had bandaged his shoulder. He moved like a man held together by will and stubbornness alone, but his eyes were clear and alert. Caroline stood barefoot just outside the shack, arms wrapped around her swollen belly, breath slow. She watched the sun break across the canyons, casting the distant ridges in gold. Her back ached, hips throbbed, and her legs were heavy as stone. The baby hadn't kicked since midnight. Her hand slid over the curve of her belly. "Stay with me," she whispered. "Just a little longer." Inside, Ellie scrubbed dried blood off the floor with water and ashes. She'd asked no questions since the fire had driven Trask and his men away. No celebration. No relief. Just quiet, focused movements, the kind people made after realizing the world wouldn't protect them anymore. Caroline turned as James stepped out of the shack, shirtless now, a fresh bandage across his shoulder. He carried a tin cup of black coffee, set it on the railing, and nodded toward the horizon. "They'll come back," he said. "Men like Trask don't know how to lose." "I know," she said. "You still want to teach kids after all this?" Caroline smiled faintly. "Now more than ever." James leaned against the porch post, eyes scanning the terrain. "And after the baby comes?" "I'll carry her on my back if I have to." "You sure it's a girl?" "No," she said, turning toward him. "But I like to think it is." He looked at her differently then, not with pity or worry, but something gentler, something close to admiration. "You ever been to the Southern Pass?" he asked. No. There's a river there. Soft banks. Plenty of trees. A few families live out that way. Quiet ones. Might be a place to disappear, if need be. Caroline shook her head. I'm done disappearing. If I hide now, the next girl who opens a book might be the one hunted. James sighed. You're braver than I am. No, she said. I'm just angry. She stepped down into the yard, pausing by the burnt trench. Smoke still rose in thin tendrils from the blackened brush. Then the pain struck. Sharp, deep, low. Her knees buckled. She caught herself on a fence post, gasping. James was there in a heartbeat. Caroline. Contraction, she grunted. A real one. He helped her back inside, where Ellie scrambled to fetch water and blankets. Been a while since I did this, James muttered, trying to hide the tremble in his voice. You've done this before? Ellie asked wide-eyed. James nodded slowly. My wife before she. He didn't finish. He just rolled up his sleeves and got to work. They cleared the table, patted it with quilts. Caroline lay back, sweat already beading on her brow. The room seemed smaller, hotter. Time broke into fragments. Moans, water, shouted instructions, silence. Then more moans. Caroline clenched James's hand so hard he thought she might crush the bones. Push, he said, his voice low, steady. She screamed through gritted teeth. Her face twisted, her body bucked, and then the world changed. A cry, high and sharp, then louder, urgent. Ellie sobbed. James held up the tiny, red-skinned creature, slippery and furious, and stared in awe. It's a girl, he whispered. Caroline collapsed back, breath shallow. Is she whole? She's perfect, James said. He handed her the baby, wrapped in a flannel sheet. Caroline cradled her, tears spilling silently down her cheeks. Hello, love, she whispered. You made it. James sat beside her, blood-stained and shaking, but smiling like the sky had opened. Ellie leaned in close, cheeks wet. She's got your mouth. God help her, Caroline whispered, laughing through tears. For a few hours, the world outside disappeared. The fire, the smoke, the threat, it all faded in the warm, flickering hush of the shack. The baby fed quietly. Caroline drifted between sleep and wakefulness. James cleaned, checked the window lines, fed the dog, and kept his rifle close. But just before dusk, Ellie returned from the ridge with a look that crushed whatever peace had settled. They're back, she said. And there's more this time. James peered through the spyglass. At least a dozen riders, well-armed, moving with slow confidence down the ridge. Trask at the center, his black hat casting a long shadow. They waited for word to get back to the town, James said. Now they've got support. Volunteers. Angry fathers. Maybe bounty men. Caroline's eyes darkened. She shifted the baby to her other arm. He wants to make an example of me. He might, James said. But he ain't gonna succeed. Then we don't wait here. We fight on our terms. He looked at her, surprised. I mean it, she said. This time we choose the place. Where? Devil's Hollow. James arched a brow. That canyon's a death trap. For them, Caroline said. You said once you fought in those rocks. You said you know how to turn the land against people. I do, he said slowly. Then let's do it. James looked at the baby in her arms. She was asleep, tiny hands curled in fists. You sure you're ready for this? Caroline's expression was stone. I was born ready, she said. They're the ones who aren't. The plan came together in whispers. James drew maps in the dirt. Ellie watched, learning every mark. They'd ride out under moonlight, leave decoys behind to make it seem like they'd stayed, lead the posse into the narrow pass. Then strike. Caroline wouldn't carry the baby into a firefight, but she wouldn't stay far either. She'd wait at the lookout near the canyon, a place with shelter and enough sight to watch every step. That night, James packed ammunition and matches. Ellie loaded the rifles. Caroline kissed the baby's forehead and swaddled her tight, resting her in a basket lined with wool. As they prepared to leave, James paused beside Caroline. You don't have to go, he said. I do. If something happens. Then I'll die standing, she said. He smiled. You're one hell of a woman, Hale. I hope my daughter thinks so too. They rode in silence under the stars, cutting west toward the cliffs that guarded Devil's Hollow. The land was harsh, broken into jagged teeth of stone, dry creeks, and thornbush. But James moved through it like a ghost. He knew every bend. By dawn, they were ready. James crouched behind an outcropping, rifle aimed at the narrowest part of the pass. Ellie was perched higher, overlooking the trail. Caroline sat in a small cave above, the baby beside her, wrapped tight in her arms. Her pistol lay across her lap. The dust trail rose at mid-morning. Trask's men entered the canyon slow, cautious. But not cautious enough. James let them come in far, too far. Then he fired. The lead horse screamed. A man toppled off, shoulder torn. Ellie fired next. Another fell. Chaos erupted. The canyon echoed with gunfire, hooves, shouting. Caroline watched from above, heart clenched, every nerve alive. She whispered to her daughter, "This is what justice sounds like. Don't be afraid." James moved like a phantom, appearing, firing, vanishing. The canyon worked in his favor. Every step Trask's men took brought them closer to crossfire. Soon they broke ranks. One by one they fell back. A few tossed their weapons. One sobbed and ran. But Trask remained. He stepped forward alone, rifle aimed high. "Caroline Hale," he bellowed. "You think this makes you righteous? You think this makes you free?" Caroline stood, high above him on the rock ledge. "No," she said, "but it makes you small." He raised his gun. James fired. Trask dropped like stone. The canyon went still. Dust floated. Birds scattered. The wind carried the scent of justice. Caroline sank to her knees, holding her daughter close. Ellie clambered down to meet her, laughing and weeping at once. James limped up behind them, bloodied but standing. "We won," Ellie breathed. "No," Caroline whispered. "We began." As the sun rose higher, the three of them stood together at the edge of the canyon. And below, the land wrote a new story, one not of fear, but of fire, and a woman who refused to kneel. The wind carried no warning, just silence. It moved like a whisper across Devil's Hollow, curling through the dead trees and jagged canyon walls, tugging at the scorched rocks where men had bled and retreated. The canyon floor still bore the dust prints of boots and hooves, and in the deeper shadows, dried blood crusted over shattered rifles and broken pride. But it wasn't over. Caroline Hale sat near the rim, her back to the rising sun, baby cradled in one arm, revolver resting in her lap. She hadn't spoken much since the canyon ambush, but her silence wasn't weakness. It was preparation. Her jaw was tighter now, her gaze unflinching. The child slept soundly, wrapped in wool and warmth, unaware that the world was still deciding whether she would live free or grow under tyranny. Below, James Cutter paced with a limp, dragging his injured leg slightly. His shoulder was stitched tight with fishing line, and though it throbbed with every movement, he didn't let it slow him. He was digging, stacking, reinforcing what they had started. The canyon had held once, but now it needed to hold again, because the enemy hadn't scattered. They'd regrouped. From the bluff above the north side of the hollow, Ellie peered through a spyglass. Her cheeks were sunburnt, hands wrapped in cloth from days of work and worry. But her eyes, once soft and hesitant, were sharp now. Steady. She called down to James. "They're coming," she said. "Maybe 20. With wagons." James looked up, not surprised. "Trask's dead," he muttered. "But someone took his place." "More guns this time," Ellie added. "And torches." Caroline stood. "They plan to burn us out." James nodded grimly. "They want to erase the story." Caroline didn't reply. She walked to the edge, looking down at the pass, the place where ash still marked where men fell days ago. The memory of that battle clung to her like a second skin. Not just the smoke and screams, but the moment afterward, the moment she held her daughter and felt, for the first time, not fear, but defiance. "They think this is where it ends," she said. "Let's make sure it is. For them." They had no army, no sheriff, no gallows. What they had was land, knowledge of it, and will. That had to be enough. By midday, the final defenses were set. James had narrowed the canyon entrance with logs and broken wagons. They'd placed their last 2 sticks of dynamite deep in the side crevice, buried under a thin veil of dirt, wired with a trip line that stretched nearly invisible in the sand. The rest would be smoke, stone, and precision. Caroline took her daughter to the overlook cave, the same one she'd used before. Ellie stayed with her, rifle across her knees, eyes never leaving the trail. The girl was no longer a bystander. She'd chosen this stand, this hill, and whatever came with it. James waited at the base of the hollow, Winchester cradled in his arms. Jasper the dog stood beside him, tail stiff, teeth bared. The riders appeared at sundown. They came in 2s and 3s, spreading along the ridge like carrion birds. Their leader, a tall man in a green duster with a thick mustache, rode a black horse and carried a long-barreled rifle across his back. He didn't shout scripture. He didn't speak of righteousness. This one came for vengeance. He raised a hand. The riders halted. James stepped forward a few paces, stopping just short of the shadows. "Turn around," he called. "Ain't no victory waiting for you here." The man in the duster dismounted slowly, like a man used to being obeyed. "I'm not here to argue," he said. "I'm here for the teacher." James cocked his rifle. The man's voice dropped to steel. "You're harboring rebellion. A woman who defied the law, the church, and good order. She teaches girls to read as if they're men, teaches boys that they're wrong to lead, and she carries a bastard child in a house built on defiance. I can't let that stand." Caroline appeared then. She stepped out of the cave shadow, baby in one arm, pistol in the other, and her voice, quiet but unshaking, cut across the canyon like a blade. "Then build something better, because this isn't law. It's cowardice in uniform." The man's eyes flicked toward her. "So you're the blasphemer." She descended the path slowly, handed the baby to Ellie, and walked the last stretch alone. "Caroline," James muttered, but she raised a hand to silence him. "I'm not running," she said. "I've run enough." The man smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "I admire courage, ma'am. I truly do. But courage doesn't mean you're right. You threaten the order. That's what this is about." "No," she said. "This is about power. Who holds it, and who's told to stay silent." She paused at the narrow trench, toe brushing the trip line beneath the dirt. "You can kill me," she said, "but the next teacher will be braver. The next girl will shoot straighter. And eventually, one of them will put you in the ground." The man's eye twitched. His hand moved. James fired. The bullet took the man in the chest, flinging him back. Chaos exploded. Riders surged forward. Guns roared. The hollow lit up in flame and fury. Ellie fired from the ridge, dropping one man before he reached the pass. Jasper lunged at another, dragging him screaming from the saddle. James pulled Caroline down behind the logs as bullets slammed into the barricade. A wagon pushed forward, loaded with dry hay and fire barrels. James looked at Caroline. "Now." She grabbed the wire. The canyon screamed. The dynamite blew, ripping a hole through rock and rider alike. Fire and dust geysered into the sky. Horses shrieked. Men flew. The wagon disintegrated. The survivors broke. Some ran. Some crawled. A few screamed Trask's name, even in death. But none reached the shack. None saw the baby. None touched the future they tried to burn. When the smoke cleared, only silence remained. James limped toward the ruins of the barricade. Jasper followed, nose twitching. Ellie stood with her rifle still raised, breath ragged. Caroline walked slowly down the slope, baby back in her arms. She passed a dying man groaning in the dirt. She didn't stop. She didn't speak. She simply stared at the smoldering wreckage and felt nothing. No pity. No regret. Just clarity. The threat was gone. But the war wasn't. That night, they buried the bodies in a single grave at the base of the hollow. No prayers. No names. Just silence. The stars blinked overhead like old witnesses. Days passed. Then weeks. Caroline rebuilt the cabin. This time, it had 2 rooms, a porch, and a bell. She rang it every morning at dawn. And the children came. Boys and girls. Some rode 5 miles. Others came barefoot from nearby ranches. They sat in rows under the oak tree as Caroline read from battered books and taught with chalk scraped across planks of wood. James built desks when he could. Ellie helped teach arithmetic. And on a post by the front gate, carved into a plank of cedar, hung a new sign. Knowledge is the flame they can't burn. The baby grew. She smiled early, walked by 10 months. Her first word wasn't mama or papa. It was book. Caroline held her close one windy evening, watching the sun fall behind Devil's Hollow. She pressed her lips to the child's head. "They'll come again one day," she whispered. "But next time we won't just be ready." She looked out over the valley, where smoke had once risen, and saw instead a future. "We'll be waiting." And far below, in the place where fire once consumed rebellion, new grass had begun to grow.